Our final med talk of the day is Dr. Ty Mo. Dr. Ty is committed to helping children better deal with stress so they feel more ease in life. Through neurologically based chiropractic, he helps shift the nervous system out of fight, flight, freeze, and into a state for healing, growth, and development. With 13 years in practice and as the Minnesota mentor for his technique, Dr. Ty is passionate about continuing to help kids experience their birthright, a carefree childhood. What's overlooked in the mind-body connection, turning on your inner healer.
All right. Let me take you back to December of 2020. I am preparing for my afternoon shift, and on the schedule, I see a new patient, a 9-year-old boy with 7 diagnoses. He has generalized anxiety disorder, sensory processing disorder, ADHD, ASD, Tourette's, ODD, and OCD. What goes through your mind when you hear that list? For myself, as both a parent and a professional, 2 things. Number 1, can't imagine what this kiddo's been through. Number 2, I've got my work cut out for me. I'm curious, I start wondering, like, how many doctors has he already seen? How many times have parents retold his same exact story? I actually wonder how parents are doing. Are they exhausted? Are they hopeless? How's their marriage? So picture this, when Connor arrives, he's constantly pacing. He has non-stop talking about Mario Kart. He's saying he's scared, and he's got these tics, at least 40 in the first 10 minutes we're together. Mom says, Dr. Ty, we're here because we're at the end of our rope. He has no impulse control. He doesn't behave. Everything's a battle at school and at home. He's always coming home with these bad behavior tickets. We're getting more and more calls from his special ed teacher. What you see here is a list of what mom shared they've already tried: OT, speech, family therapy, social therapy, a dozen different combinations of medications. Mom said all with little change. So I've got to be honest, even though I'm here, I'm skeptical. I'm not a holistic medicine kind of person, but we're desperate. So we do our eval, we do our neurological scans, which I'll share later. We put a plan together and we get to work. Fast forward 1 month. Connor has had 12 neurological adjustments. He's starting to self-regulate more. As a matter of fact, mom said he's starting to listen. One day she goes to me, Dr. Ty, you know those bad behavior tickets Connor was getting at school? He's starting to come home with good behavior tickets. They're called golden tickets. That means a perfect day, all day long. He's had 6 in a row. And while I was hesitant because of all the other things we tried, this is actually making a difference. It's almost like magic. So you see, the thing that jumped out to me was that 10th visit. When Connor came in that visit, he was halfway through his adjustment, and it took me off guard because his earlier adjustments, he'd have 20 to 30 ticks in a visit. However, that visit, it was only those 2. So how did this happen? It wasn't because I knew something special about those diagnoses. It was simply because I was looking at his body differently, looking to see what was causing him to be locked in fight or flight, what was constantly stressing his brain and preventing him from making progress no matter what else he tried. And the reason is I started looking at his body as a key piece in the mind-body connection, and not necessarily what he could do with his body. There's going to be amazing references from many mindfulness speakers this conference on deep breathing, meditation, move mindfully, things I love, things I do myself, things I recommend my practice and my patients do. What we're going to be talking about today is something your child's body might be doing to them, whether you realize it or not. That's why it's called what's overlooked in the mind-body connection. Now myself, I've been passionate about kids since I started, and I'm so appreciative that the Minnesota Association for Children's Mental Health has invited me back to speak again this year. And since I graduated in 2007 from chiropractic school, I have loved studying pediatrics and neurology. And you might be wondering, like, what does cracking the back have to do with mental health? Well, you see, because of my studies, our office is different. It's a gentle approach, no popping, cracking, but it's designed to find where there's fight or flight stuck on inside the body, and instead start to put calm and organization in. And since welcoming my own son, Mason, in August of 2020, my passion has just been fueled. And I imagine that you're here today because you are passionate as well. We all want to know, what are the variables that can help us help these kiddos? So when it comes to these, as we know, early childhood incidences are critical, right? Like ACEs gives us check boxes. The more we have, the more likely mental health is going to be a challenge. Myself, I remember being 11 years old, coming home from school one day, and my mom and dad sit me down, and they say, Ty, now we love you and your sister Dakota very much, but we've fallen out of love with each other. We're divorcing. Before I know it, I've moved to a new town, new school, lots of kids, no friends. I'm in Mrs. Knox's 7th grade math class, and raising my hand to answer a question my classmate just got wrong, when suddenly I realized, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't be speaking up. I don't have any friends. I shouldn't be one-upping people. It's better to be quiet. And as an introvert, I spent the rest of my schooling trying to be the invisible kid. Our childhood really does influence who we become. But what about that kiddo like Connor, where mom said he's always been that way? Or what about the kiddo where you know what boxes were checked, but no matter what you do, you can't break through? What we're going to focus on today then is, in Connor's case, why was his nervous system locked into fight or flight? Why was he unable to change for so long? So let's dive in to some critical senses going on in the brain. We know that the brain values safety above all else, and it perceives if it's safe or not by the environment. We use our 5 senses that we learn about as kids: touch, taste, smell, hearing, sight. So for example, if your son is on the playground and he gets bullied, and the next day he sees that same bully, it causes stress. Or a little girl is tiptoed to the top of the steps and she overhears her parents argue. If we check the boxes of physical abuse, emotional neglect, divorce, parents, it means our bodies become more vigilant to look out for those in the future. It's like a castle. You build the walls high and you've got a guard on the tower and he's scanning the horizon for the invader or the intruder. But did you know that there are actually 2 senses inside the body that are even more critical? These are proprioception and vestibular. They help our brain feel safe when we're moving through space. Today, we're going to focus on proprioception, which comes from the muscles and the joints in our body, especially the little muscles around the joints. So proprioception is something you would have experienced when your kiddo was anxious or nervous and you gave them that deep bear hug, or you did joint compression, or you covered them with a weighted blanket. All those things stimulated proprioception, which put calm into the brain. That's why proprioception is one of the critical pieces for mental health. It puts calm into the brain because it goes into the brain, it stimulates, goes into the cerebellum, the parietal lobe, and those feed forward into another critical area for mental health, the prefrontal cortex. Now we know the PFC is critical. This area decreases fight or flight. It helps with impulse control, making decisions, regulating emotions. I mean, raise your hand if you want that for your kiddo. I know I do. So as we get proprioception into the brain, I like to think of it as this calming response to get us out of fight or flight. So the question is then, why is a chiropractor talking about proprioception and the prefrontal cortex? Well, here's the thing. Proprioception, if it comes from the joints and the muscles, we've got joint, 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 little muscle, little muscle, little muscle. I mean, 60% of proprioception and that calming input into the brain comes from the spine. The most critical area is the upper neck. A third comes from there. And the little muscles there actually have input into the brain that's 50 to 100 times more concentrated than big muscles of the body. In addition, the upper neck surrounds the brainstem, which is where the vagus nerve is. And that, as you know, not only regulates the organs, but it's a major brake pedal to slow the brain down. So while we know proprioception is critical to calm the brain. What happens when this isn't there? Well, here's the thing. When proprioception goes away, we actually get something different. How this happens is if there's a joint or a bone that's starting to shift out of alignment or it's stuck. In chiropractic, this is what we call a subluxation. You may have heard of this focused on the joint, but the key that we're focusing on today is how that actually affects the brain. You see what happens when a joint is stuck, instead of sending calm into the brain, it sends the opposite, something called nociception. When this goes into the brain, it can sometimes be perceived as pain, but not always. Most importantly, what it is perceived as is stress. When this nociception goes into the brain, it actually activates fight or flight. It's through the HPA axis, hypothalamus, pituitary adrenals. The adrenals then pump out adrenaline and cortisol and those stress hormones that we're familiar with. This is exactly what was happening in Connor's situation. His body was craving calm, but all he was getting from inside was stress. The hand model by Daniel Siegel is a good example here. We know information comes up through the spinal cord into the brain stem. There's this limbic brain and then the frontal brain. That's where the PFC that we all want our kiddos to be able to access. In Connor's case, this limbic brain, in a sense, it popped the lid. And now he was leading with stress no matter what parents did. And he had a great team trying to help get some access to those calming areas, but whoop, it just popped back up. No matter how hard they tried, it would come back up because the problem was coming from inside his body. There was nociception stressing his brain from the inside. And that's why he was stuck, no matter what they did. If you think of this like a castle, where, as I said, we've got the towers up and the guard is looking for the invader. The problem is the invader's not on the outside. It was already in Connor's body. And when I discovered that, I knew I could help him. The thing with this, we mentioned the 5 outer senses where it's easier to identify physical abuse, emotional neglect as examples. But subluxation is overlooked because you don't sense it with our outer senses. We don't hear it, we don't see it, we don't smell it. Fortunately, how we can look for it is through neurological scans. Now, this is the example of Connor's that I said I would share. What we want to see here are the white bars. Those mean there is good proprioception, good calm going into his brain. Where there's green and blue, there's a little bit of stress, but where there's red, that's where we're on high alert. And you can see his upper neck and in a lower area as well are sending stress into his brain. Now, this technology, this has been around a while that we could measure what's happening. But the good news is that science is catching up. The leader for brain-based chiropractic, Dr. Heidi Horvick, her team's out in New Zealand. What she has been looking into is hooking EEGs up to the brain and measuring when you give a good neurological adjustment, very gentle, very specific, what does it do to the brain? Now, brain scientists, they get excited if there's a 2 or 3% change. What Dr. Horvick has found is that on average, a single adjustment will activate the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex, by an average of 20%. Imagine if your kiddo started to get 20% more calm. Time after time, you start to add that up over months and years, where would your kiddo be? So a story that jumps out to me comes from a question, because I often wonder, what would happen if all kiddos had these scans early on? What would happen if subluxation was added to the list of ACEs? Now, one kiddo is Nolan. He came to me when he was 14 years old. Mom was worried about how high school was going to go. And she said that Nolan, since he was young, since she could remember, he'd always been worried, stressed, depressed. He'd get headaches and stomach aches because of the stress he was under. And when we did his scans, again, that's the first step to know. We knew we could help. And so we started adjusting. A few months later, Mom sits me down. She goes, Dr. Ty, can I talk to you? Nolan had his pediatrician visit yesterday, and the doctor asked how he was doing. Nolan said for the first time that he can remember, He wasn't feeling stressed, anxious, or depressed. Mom starts to tear up. I start to tear up. And Nolan's right now, he's halfway through high school, and it's gone great since he started, simply because we knew what to look for inside his body. So where do these invaders come from then? Well, just like ACEs, we look for patterns of stress that start early in life: pregnancy, labor, delivery, early childhood. One mom at 34 weeks pregnant, she fell and broke her ankle. A plate had to be put in, so they needed to do surgery, actually 2 plates. And the baby then experienced anesthesia and a rush of adrenaline while still in the womb. When he did decide to come out, it was a 30-hour labor. That meant 30 hours of contractions, pushing on his neck and his head. Not only is the neck the most critical area, it's also the most vulnerable area at birth. Once baby got through that 30 hours, he came out with the cord wrapped around his neck, his shoulder, his torso, which meant now an additional amount of pressure when he was going through the birth canal. His head bones were shifted, and he had a broken collarbone. Needless to say, he was crying a lot. The second night, parents looked at each other, thought, how are we going to do this? He ended up having trouble nursing because of a tongue tie. Mom's breast milk production was low. They tried donor milk, but there are allergies there. Lots of struggle those first couple months. Lots of crying, lots of hardship. Now, fortunately, Mason's dad is a chiropractor, and he knew what to do. He knew how to get rid of the invader in the castle, and now Mason's thriving. He's doing great. I've often wondered, where would he become? Because when I hear the beginning of that story I just shared, a lot of times parents don't know what to do. And I hear the follow-up of that story as baby continues to cry all the time. They're colicky. They've never slept well. They're constipated. Maybe they had ear infections, tonsil adenoid issues. The list goes on. Question then is like, does a high needs baby have to become a high needs child? And when you can shift the neurology, the physiology early on, that's not the case. Now, you might be wondering then, what about my kiddo? Could things have been different for my kiddo when he was young? Or maybe you're thinking of that kiddo that you work with and wondering, some of these symptoms, some of the things you just talked about sound familiar. And yes, while it is never too early to start, it's never too late either. I mean, think about Connor. He had spent the first 9 years, 10 months of his life basically getting a naughty ticket every day. And once we started opening up his brain, once we found where that robber was, so we could pull the robber out and start putting calm into his brain, he was able to make huge progress in just the first month. And so he has gone now, not only to the kid that has gotten 6 golden tickets in a row, but mom said she actually had to take the clip that was holding the tickets. She had to take it off the refrigerator because the magnet wasn't strong enough to hold up that thick stack of tickets anymore. So for your child, for the kiddos that you work with, I want you to know that there is hope out there, that if your kiddo is locked in fight or flight, there might be this key missing piece, and that with all the amazing providers out there, the collaboration and the potential is powerful. Between the team you already have, the internal work that myself, colleagues of mine throughout the country are doing, we can really shift kiddos to get them that sense of peace, that sense of groundedness that they all deserve, and open up their life to be amazing for our youth.